The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Many of Jesus' disciples who were listening said, "This saying is hard. Who can accept it?" Since Jesus knew that his disciples were murmuring about this, he said to them, "Does this shock you? What if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life, while the flesh is of no avail. The words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you who do not believe." Jesus knew from the beginning the ones who would not believe and the one who would betray him. And he said, "For this reason I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by my Father." As a result of this, many of his disciples returned to their former way of life and no longer accompanied him. Jesus then said to the 12, "Do you also want to leave?" And Simon Peter answered him, "Master, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and are convinced that you are the Holy One of God." The Gospel of the Lord. It's not easy to be Catholic these days. Anyone who is aware of the world around us knows that there is a lot to be sad about, or even angry about, in the reality of the Catholic Church today. Look around. It seems there are a lot of reasons to leave the Catholic Church, and perhaps not many to stay. Everyone has their own list of complaints about the church, whether it's disagreement about things that are perceived to be teachings, or scandal about the behavior of leaders. Often, one person's list is diametrically opposed to another person's list. And I'm not going to comment on these things. Anyone who's looking can find plenty of reasons to leave the church. What often amazes me is not that people leave, but that people stay. And nearly every week, I encounter somebody, and several people sometimes, returning to the Catholic Church after a time of being away, perhaps still needing to deal with the causes of anger and alienation, but back nevertheless. The event we just heard in the Gospel speaks directly to this. After Jesus' long discourse on the Eucharist, including the unmitigated and unapologetic command to eat his flesh and drink his blood in order to have life, we find a sizable number of his friends, not his enemies, mind you, but his friends, no longer able to literally stomach him or his words. After he watched them leave, he said to the 12, whom he had chosen, "Do you also want to leave?" Their response did not arise out of logic or even understanding of what Jesus said, but out of their relationship of faith and trust in him. "Master, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and are convinced that you are the Holy One of God." When I ask people why they stay in the Catholic Church in spite of the problems they may have with it, or why they return in spite of past hurts or alienation, so often the answer revolves around the same 2 points: a sense of being chosen or called in some way, and hunger. They long for the Eucharist. Even if the experience of Mass may not always be inspiring or intellectually or emotionally satisfying, they know that the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist in some way goes beyond any other kind of religious experience. They long for the community that is called together around the Eucharist. Even if everyone who gathers, as well as those who lead, are sinners like the rest of us, there is something here that transcends those limitations. Even if they and we are not always able to name that hunger, it seems to be a hunger to fulfill the command of Jesus to eat his flesh and drink his blood. And we hunger as well for communion with one another, what we traditionally call the communion of saints, and which transcends the limitations of time and place. There is a sense of home around the Eucharist. One of the qualities of home is always that it is never perfect. In fact, more often than not, home is rife with dysfunctional relationships that need to be recognized, addressed, and healed, not ignored or denied. But home is still home. Reasons for conflict and division will always exist, but home, hopefully, can become more and more a place of understanding and mutual acceptance that rises above differences. Home, finally, can never be closed in upon itself. A family cannot exist except in relation to the broader human family. If we are led to the Eucharist out of our own hunger, Christ will lead us outside of ourselves to recognize the hungers of others in our human family. As we reflected last week, in the Eucharist, we truly become what we receive. As we receive Christ, who continues to empty himself for us, we are impelled to imitate his very self-emptying on behalf of others. We cannot do that solo, as a lone ranger. We can only do that in union with one another by identifying where in our church family and in our world the work of Jesus Christ is being done, and then joining together in it. Examples and opportunities abound if we but open our eyes and look for them. And so, as we continue together to celebrate the Eucharist, keeping alive faithfulness and obedience to the command of Jesus, let us look to one another and say in our hearts, "Welcome home."